Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com, and I mentioned in my last video that I had made a beginner PLO video that I was unhappy with and won't be posting, but I had attached this short lesson on lockdown boards to that video, and so I've removed that from the video and will be posting it alone as kind of a bonus video. It's pretty short. But I had been talking about lockdown boards quite a bit in my videos, so I wanted you guys to see what I was talking about, or at least, let me explain it further. I'll probably say a couple times in this video that we're about to start the rest of the video, which is not true, because I've taken this out of, or, removed this from the rest of the video, but I guess that's all. Enjoy. So before we get into the action here, I just wanted to talk about something quickly. You'll notice it says Phil's Tip of the Week. And this isn't really something I'll be doing weekly or with any kind of pattern or regularity. I just thought that was a catchy title. But basically the idea is anytime there's a concept that I want to talk to you guys about that wouldn't really take up a whole video on its own, I'll just throw it in a segment like this so that I can get it across to you guys but don't have to figure out a way to stretch it out into a whole video. Today we're going to be talking about lockdown boards. And this is a PLO concept that I talked about briefly in my first PLO video, but didn't really get to explain fully. Lockdown board is a board where when you check raise the flop, you're repping a hand that is really tough to have outs against, given the texture of the board. And the thing about PLO is that, unlike No Limit, it's tough to kind of pure check raise bluff on flops or turns. Or even, with hands with very little equity, just because players are checking behind, or good players are checking behind with good frequencies, and because you have 4 cards, there are just a lot of boards on which, when you get check raised, or when your opponent gets check raised, if they don't have the best hand now, they have a hand with enough outs to continue so that they'll be able to call or shove. And if they call, you don't know whether they actually have like a 2-pair that's going to call the river, or like a big draw that you can now bluff them off. So you get into some tricky spots trying to check raise on certain boards. So the lockdown board concept is basically there to help you identify what boards are more bluffable. And it's the equivalent in that way to a dry board in No Limit. Like a King 4 Deuce rainbow board where obviously it's not as successful anymore or profitable anymore, but that used to be a board that everybody would check raise and get their opponents to fold 80% of the time, just because it's not a board that you hit that often. But those boards are different in PLO just because of the nature of the game. We'll get into some examples. So here, these are all examples of lockdown boards, and some are better than others. But here, like the 965 rainbow is an extremely good example of a lockdown board. Basically, when you check raise, you're not repping like 9-6, you're repping exactly 7-8. And if somebody wants to play back you, they basically need a set or a straight themselves, or just be convinced that you don't have anything. Obviously, the same can be said for a 3-spade flop like Ace 4-6. You're repping a high flush, if not the nut flush, maybe second or third nut flush by check raising the flop. And there aren't many hands with outs. Again, sets have outs, and other than that, not too much. Jack 6 and Ace 7-7 are both similar. It's not as hard as you might think to be dealt a jack, or any card when that's a pair on the board, but you still will be getting hands to fold. Also, people are c-betting this flop kind of polarized. They're not always c-betting their pocket kings, things like that, so which are some hands that might call you once or twice. So they'll be c-betting their air and then their jacks, and against somebody who's not too tough, you can take them off their air most of the time. Ace 7-7 is a little bit better, actually. There's a flush draw on this board, but let's pretend the flush draw's not there. Ace 7-7 is better because you can actually potentially get somebody to fold a 7 by the turn or river, just because they can't put in another raise on the flop with a hand like Queen Jack 10-7, and they have to be really scared that they're drawing dead. Whereas on Jack Jack 6, a hand like Jack 10 9 7 is just, not happy to get the money in, but fine with it, just because worst case you have Jack 6 and they have 9 outs, so whatever. King Queen 9 is pretty similar to the 9 6 5. It's a little bit different, or it's not that different, but if the board were like 10 9 7, sorry, 10 9 6, which would be the equivalent of this board just moved down, that's different because there can be a lot of higher wraps that can play back at you, but since the only card higher than king is an ace, there aren't any higher wraps on this board. So it's a board that, again, easy to bluff people off of hands. You might get on this board some people calling you down with like king 10 9, things like that, with 2 pair and a gutter. You might have to fire 3 shells on a board like this, unless it's an opponent who is tricky and is going to slow play a lot, which is actually a good play on a board like this when somebody check raises a polarized range. And then 6 7 8 with 2 clubs. I kind of like to check raise bluffing on boards like this with flush draws, just because people think you're less full of it. Again, even if they have a hand like 9 8 7, ace 9 8 7, let's say, they have an open ender and 2 pair, but they have to worry their open ender's no good when you're check raising the flop, and 2 pair is only 4 outs. So even then, if you have a good image, you can get people off hands as strong as that. I want to talk about some quote-unquote dry boards. These are boards that are no limit dry boards that are good to check raise bluff and no limit, or until people start realizing that you're doing it. The reason these aren't as good in PLO is that when you check raise a board like this, you're not repping as defined a hand. You're not repping a monster necessarily. On ace 9 4, you can be check raising top 2. Same can be said for king 7 deuce. So if somebody has top pair and 3 overs, top pair 3 overs and 2 backdoor flush draws, they're never folding. And or even like top and bottom pair will call at least once, just because they have 2 pair and the board's not all that scary, things like that. So while these are okay-ish boards to check raise, they're not really great. The other thing about ace 4 9 is that just in PLO you can have a wrap on this board, whereas in no limit you don't really have to worry so much about somebody going crazy with deuce 3 that they probably folded pre-flop, or deuce 5 or 3 5. So I mean, basically that's the concept. Think about which boards fit kind of the criteria. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out, and then test it out. Get in some games and see how people react to you when you check raise these boards that people are unlikely to have hands to fight back with. And I think that you'll find that these are a lot easier than some of the boards you might have been trying to check raise, like the ace 9 4 ones. And I guess that's it. So let's just get into the action.